Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Hired. I am your host, Mike Thompson from Spark, and each week we bring you a new episode, something to do in recruiting, hiring, process. I know it sounds like a very exciting, stimulating topic, but it is, and especially this week, we're going to be tackling something very important around diversity. And my guest this week is, I want to say, brilliant and super impressive, insightful. I'm super excited that Jess agreed to come on here. I don't know why she did, but I'm super happy she did to talk about this topic. We're going to be directing it to data and analytics as in terms of how to build, attract, assess, and successfully onboard diverse talent. But before I bring Jess out, I want to give you a little bit of background on what you can expect from her. Now, research department here is top notch. So was able to scour Wikipedia and the internet to find out everything I could about Jess. And I'm going to give you a bit of her professional background. So let's go back. Let's go way back. She started her career or early career, shouldn't say started, but with MIT Lincoln Library doing a lot of stuff that I don't even begin to understand what she was doing. But here's what I gathered from what she did. She was developing, leading, and executing applied research projects in the air and missile defense. Pretty cool stuff. From there, she does what most people do, consults. Joined BCG, Boston Consulting Group, for about a little over a year doing consulting, helping clients, variety of industries, make sense of their digital roadmap, product roadmap, before landing in Wayfair in 2018. And among a bunch of different things she accomplished during her time, one of the things she prides herself in is building the advanced analytics function team for the merchandising technology. She has multiple publications, I think 5, maybe even more to this point. Ladies and gentlemen, my very special guest, and I promise I'm not going to mispronounce your last name, Jess Stigile. Jess, welcome
Hey,
to the
Mike.
show.
Hey, thanks so much for that nice walk down memory lane and for having me on the show. I really appreciate some of the content that y'all have been making, and I'm excited today to talk about one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, I'm super excited. But before we jump into the topic of diversity, I want to explore a couple other things with you. First, I have, a question that I was thinking about is, were you one of the 83,000 members that was part of the Kickstarter community for Frosthaven, which is the build on to a passion of yours with Gloomhaven, which what I believe is the largest Kickstarter for in the gaming community. Were you part of that or no?
Sadly, no, I wasn't. I was a little late to the game on that one, but definitely support it. Gloomhaven's absolutely one of my favorite board games, and anything to build off of that and make it more complex is great.
Awesome. Okay, well, I was curious to see if you how much you were into that community, but yeah, it was fun to explore that. And the other one of your passions, which stuck out, woodworking.
Yes.
I have two questions. Where does that come from? And what is the most complicated project or yeah, project you've done in the woodworking space?
Gosh, I grew up around power tools. My mom knows how to use them. We had a kind of an old house. She'd fix things here and there. So I definitely learned from my mom. And now that when I got my own house with a basement, I had room for a workshop. So I got lots of toys to play with.
Full workshop in
Yeah,
the basement.
yeah. It's an 1800s house with an old unfinished basement. So it's a perfect place to kick up some sawdust and make some dirt.
That's amazing. And the most, I guess, complicated or I guess project you're the most proud of or yeah, the most fun doing.
Yeah. I mean, most complicated, anyone who's made cabinetry, cabinets are hard. Getting everything perfectly square and in the exact right spot is was one of the more challenging things. But I think my favorite thing, I made a bed for my mom's when she got a retirement house in Charleston and worked with some caning. in kind of the panels of the bed. That was my first time working with that material, and it was a lot of fun to do.
Very, very cool. I find, you're such an interesting individual, and that just adds another layer of interest. So, diversity, we're going to jump into this. I know this is a passion of yours, and the conversations we've had offline have been phenomenal. I think to kickstart the conversation, why should a leader value diversity on their team? I'm going to give you the big screen to take over here.
Yeah. And maybe before we get into it, I'll go ahead and I want to level set with the group on expectations for what we can share today. Let's start with the anti-goal. We are not going to give you a single one size fits all strategy for your diversity, equity, and inclusion practices on analytics teams, because DEI is like any org topic. It's super complex and it needs to be adapted to the context of your org. But what I'm hoping we'll do is share some perspectives about what I've learned in building a team that's over 50% women and about 30% people from non-traditional educational backgrounds, in hopes that it'll give people some ideas and questions to bring back to their own org and hiring practices. But now to hop over to the topic to get into why diversity matters, I'm just going to take it purely from a business standpoint, because that's where we have real tangible value that I think sells a lot of people. The leading research from, top business schools, think tanks, consulting firms are all pointing to companies that build and empower diverse teams performing better. They're going to be more innovative. They're going to process the information more carefully. They're going to have more resiliency around change. And these are all the types of things that you need to get better financial performance over a long time horizon. I think it's especially true today in the analytics space because the types of questions that we're trying to solve and answer are not simple. There's never one right answer. There's usually a lot of answers with pros and cons. And you have to really view a problem from a lot of different angles to get to the best answer out on the table. And maybe just to make it really tangible for the group, one way that I've seen this play out in my own teams is kind of on the dimension of having diversity in educational background. When we're brainstorming a problem, all of the STEM majors are kind of hovering around the same solutions and same ideas, and we kind of get stuck in a rut because we've all been trained with the same frameworks in school for how to attack a problem, how to break it down, and what to do with it. And then every now and then you'll have the art major or the government major on the team chime in with a completely orthogonal way of looking at the problem that gets us out of that rut and advances the group's thinking. And so that's just one of the ways in which I've seen this play out in my own teams. And it's helped us really just move forward as a team and get better results.
I love what you said there about attacking a problem from different perspectives. And I think, in analytics, it's very real. And that's what you use analytics is to solve problems. So the problems you are solving, the reason why they're coming in you to use analytics is because they're complicated. So it's not easy.
Exactly.
If it was, we would probably just have an algorithm that would run that, where it needs that human element, and the human element needs to be different and complete and comprehensive because people are different. And usually the problems are serving people. So I love what you said there about bringing in different perspectives. So based on that, an understanding of how it contributes to performance, why do you think, in your opinion, there is a lack of diversity in data and analytics?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of reasons here. It's a systemic problem with a lot of root causes, but I'll highlight maybe two for the group that I think are things we can tangibly attack in most organizations. One of them is kind of at a company level and how companies are approaching incentivizing DEI. And the second is more on a hiring manager level and how we're bringing diverse candidates in the door. So kind of on that first topic, it's any leader is going to have a lot of priorities on their plate. It's just part of our job is knowing what are the right problems to solve now, what are the problems I can descope, and what are the ones that I can put off to, next month, next quarter. They're not the burning priority right now. And so, we're always trying to prioritize based on business value, impact, things that are going to impact the company and thus help our performance reviews, help our compensation. Companies, if they're not adding incentives to give DEI an equal footing to all of those other priorities on a manager's or a leader's list, even the most well-intentioned manager is not going to give it sufficient attention because there's just not enough hours in the week to do every single thing. And so not a lot of companies, some companies are starting to do this, and it's great. Even companies that I've been at is adding DEI related competencies to how people are evaluated, which I think is great, but not all companies are doing that. And some companies that are doing it, they're making it kind of a check the box exercise. You know, if you did it, great, but they're not going and saying, well, if you do it really well or better than other people, let's reward that, let's celebrate that. So that's kind of one thing that's happening at a company level that I think is important for people to observe and think about in their own companies. Then the second one, on more of that hiring manager level, a lot of the ways hiring managers, and myself included, I am guilty of this when I first started building a team, but a lot of the way we approach writing a job description is defining our ideal well-rounded candidate for a role. And so we end up with these, I'm sure you've seen this too, Mike, like we end up with these long laundry lists of requirements that, you know, each one of those requirements is going to be filtering out people from your candidate pool and narrowing it down further and further. And when you think about people from marginalized identities, there's, you know, systems of privilege, oppression, bias that are starting to filter some of those people out with each bullet point that you're adding. I think one of the things that a lot of hiring managers don't think about is you kind of, and to use an analogy someone on my team used that I think is great, your team needs to have a set of tools. It needs to be a complete toolbox, but not every single person needs to be a Swiss Army knife. Not every single person needs to be great at everything. You can have some people that are great at one thing, other people that are great at another thing, and complement each other. And so I think trying to figure out how we simplify those job descriptions in a way that makes them more inclusive, less intimidating to apply, is just going to help you get a broader set of candidates in your pool to consider.
I love what you said there about the two areas. And I couldn't agree more about organizations acknowledging, incentivizing, and providing a framework or training on how to do it, how to actually build diverse teams, because it is important. And they need to value that it is important first before they put those incentives in place. And secondly, the job description. I mean, we could have a full conversation about that in itself, as you probably know that I'm passionate about that. But I always find it entertaining and kind of sad when the company values diversity and the first thing they say is 10 years experience in the industry that they're in. It's like,
Yeah.
how would, like, you're just, it doesn't make any sense to me right there, right? You're
Yeah.
kind of
And just like
losing.
one funny story too recently, like a few months ago, someone reached out to me about a role where they wanted someone to have like 10 years of experience with TensorFlow. TensorFlow was publicly released in 2015. So if you're looking for 10 years of experience with TensorFlow, that's going to be a really small group of people. So I know that's an extreme example, but like these things happen. Nobody's malicious in doing it. They're well-intentioned. They're just not really thinking through, do I really need 10 years of experience in that? Or does anybody really have 10 years of experience with that?
And I think, people usually associate years of experience with seniority, right? Like 10 years of experience means somebody's senior, but that's not necessarily the truth anymore. And I think we overgeneralize in job descriptions and kind of place value on things, and you have to kind of set some standards of excellence. But I like the way that you evaluate it, looking at your team as tools and understanding kind of where that fits. And it requires you as a leader to be aware of the strengths of your team and like where everybody is and kind of how you can add to it. Now, we're building off of why you think there's a lack of diverse talent in DNA. So how would you advise somebody to try and attract diverse talent now that we know kind of some of the issues?
Yeah. There's definitely a whole slew of things that your company should be doing around company brand, et cetera. And I'm sure, Mike, you know a lot about that and have dealt with that as well. But I think for a lot of people who are listening to this, they're probably more at the hiring manager level. So what can you do is go back to that job description issue and, ask yourself critically, am I filtering out candidates that could be really great diamonds in the rough here? I think everyone wants to hire rock stars or, wants rock stars on their team maybe, and they approach it as trying to hire rock stars. But one, if your company isn't the best company in the world with the best culture, paying the best. You're not going to hire a team of rock stars. And two, it's a lot more fun to mint a rock star or build a rock star on your team. That's a lot more rewarding as a manager. And so I think, like, trying to figure out how to break down the job description and make it more approachable and also more realistic about what you actually need on your team is what you need to do. There's two questions that I always try to ask myself and have tried to iterate on over time, because again, I did this wrong when I first started hiring. The questions are, what skills does someone need to have on day one to hit the ground running versus what could they develop over a normal, 3-month onboarding period or whatever is normal for your company. And then the second question is, what skills do I need to add to my team at this point in time? So what skills does this specific hire need, given the context of all of the other strengths of my team, the work my team is going to be doing over the next 6 months, et cetera. And so I think when you start to ask yourself those questions, you can start to tailor the job description a bit more and maybe bump some of those requirements down to preferences, or think about how you're framing it a bit more. Again, to your point, does a person really need 10 years of experience? Or are you looking for someone who managed a large stakeholder group, right? Like, you can do that without 10 years of experience, especially in data and analytics, where the field's kind of young and evolving, and not everybody's going to have 20 years of experience because some of these things didn't exist 20 years ago. And so I think just, trying to really break that down and be honest with yourself is going to go a long way in just getting more people in the door. And the more people you can get in the door and resumes to look at, the more you can then start to consider the person as a person with their strengths and weaknesses and how they complement your team.
I love what you said there about looking at skills. And I think people overvalue and try to generalize by just looking at experiences. And, what we see a lot is, and this is another thing that I see, is we want someone that's naturally curious, loves to learn, but we want someone that's done exactly what we need to do. So it's like, okay, well, you want someone that wants to learn and grow, but you just want them to do what they've been doing for the last 10 years for you. So,
and then they're going to leave in a year because they're bored.
Exactly. So I love what you said. It's like, what skills do they have to have day one, and what skills can we grow them into to help us all get there? And that's part of how you can attract diverse talent, is by offering more than just a paycheck. You're offering them the ability to grow, the leadership, the opportunities, the team to have that. That's a compelling message in the labor market, instead of, hey, we've seen you've built up this advanced analytics team, we want you to come and do the exact same thing here. Like, well, okay, but there has to be something different for me to grow. So love what you're saying about skills, looking at that. I think it's also critical to look at assessing different types of diverse talent, because if everybody's different and we're evaluating people that have skills from different backgrounds and experiences, how do you assess that? Because that seems like it's a hard thing to standardize. So have you had any experience or any lessons learned on how to assess different types of talent?
Yeah, honestly, it's still a work in progress for me, and I learn more each time I have to add a new person to my team. I think, honestly, the takeaway is you can't standardize it. Like, people don't fit into boxes and checklists. And so you need to acknowledge that when you're interviewing a candidate, you shouldn't have your checklist of things that you're looking for and go through, your 5 questions that you ask every single person. You really need to tailor it to that person, what you're seeing in their resume, and approach the interview from the perspective of getting the clearest picture possible on who this person is, what makes them tick, what are they good at, what are they going to need to learn. Because at the end of the day, that's what you need to assess the candidate. You don't need to know if they can pass, LeetCode code, hard SQL. Like, honestly, like, you can teach that to someone in 3 months. I can onboard anybody to SQL and Python in 3 months. It's not hard. So I think when you're starting to interview a candidate, tailor the questions to what's on their resume. Ask about the projects they've worked on. Let it be a little bit of a nonlinear conversation, and ask follow-up questions. Like, know what you want to pressure test. Like, okay, if I need someone on my team who's really great at stakeholder management and gets business context, like understands this industry and can ask the right business questions, then as they're talking about experiences on their resume, start to probe in those areas instead of doing these like, tell me about a time you did blank type of questions. And then also, I think, one of the things that I would highlight in data and analytics specifically, our field is incredibly friendly and accessible to career switchers. So people that were maybe on the business side, the product side, they learned a little bit of math, they learned how to code. It's especially true in business analytics. And I would also argue product analytics, as long as the person invested a little bit more in learning some more math and statistics. And so we should be looking for these types of candidates because they're going to bring more diverse experiences, backgrounds, identities, et cetera. And so then if you're going to hire someone who's maybe a career switcher who might be kind of lopsided on different skill sets, you need to have your own investment thesis, so to speak, on what characteristics are going to give you a high return on investment in this person, because you're going to need to invest in them. And so I think some of the things that I like to look for specifically would be ownership mentality. So are they regularly thinking about how their solution's working, proactively finding issues and owning them and trying to make what they've built better? I also look for just ability to learn. What's something that they've learned recently and taught themselves? How independent were they? How proactive were they? How fast did they learn? How did they like to learn? Even if it has nothing to do with like skills for the specific job. And then third thing I like to look for is someone who's shown an interest in the field, like by taking action. So if you come to me as a career switcher saying I'm interested in being on your team, my first two questions for you are going to be, what interests you about this? And what have you done to explore that interest? I don't expect someone to be the world's best Python coder, but I want them to have maybe done, some kind of simple beginner online course and can fumble around and do some basic things, because that's shown me that they've demonstrated their interest in the field and can learn.
I think I always like to think that the interview is the first opportunity for you to work together. Sitting across from the table, like this could be somebody that's going to be a part of your team, and you could be their boss. So this is the first interaction you're going to have of how you work together. And I love your approach of attacking an interview about getting to know them, understanding why they did what they did, who they are, and seeing it work. I believe that anybody can do any job within reason, but if the management and the support is there, you can get them there. So if every interview you're approaching with like, okay, how can I get this individual to do this job? And then you're just evaluating what works for the time you're in right now, and where the team's at is great. And it's encouraging to hear leaders like yourself that are taking the time to get to know candidates in an interview, to just see who they are and what they bring and how that may fit with the team. So I love all of that. And there's a reason why we get along so well. And then I think, and I know we're running out of time, but like the onboarding piece, it's got to be really critical, because you can say you value diverse talent, you can hire diverse talent, but how do you make sure you set them up for success? Especially when you talk about career switchers coming in, maybe they're a high performer somewhere else and they come into a completely new job. Maybe they're not. So do you have kind of anything you can recommend on how to successfully onboard and set individuals up for success?
Yeah, and maybe we'll take the career switchers, because I think honestly that's the best way I've been able to get diverse talent to my team. I think it takes care to onboard someone who maybe is a little bit lopsided, is really spiking in some areas, not in others. And to your point, usually these are people who are probably pretty high performing in another role. They're used to being high performing and they're going to get knocked back down to square one. And, it takes a lot of, that's like a mental challenge for them, as well as you as a manager to help them manage that. So I think they need the same things that any employee should need in onboarding and learning in their career. So having really great projects that, the project is well matched to what they need to learn, having a good support structure in the team, like a buddy to check in on them that isn't their manager, that they can go to with ideas. Also just giving really clear feedback that makes them understand what the bar is, where they stand versus the bar, and then coaching, which is super important to help them grow. You should not give feedback without coaching. That is really, really bad for psychological safety. But then I think like when it comes specifically to people who are maybe, have development areas because they're switching from another field, you really need to instill like a growth mindset and tailor the development plan to where they're at right now, as opposed to just like what a general analyst at their level should be doing. So one of the most important things, prioritize the areas for development. People can't work on everything all at once. So think through like, what's the most important skill for them to build in the first 2 weeks, the first month, the first 3 months. Another thing is making it super clear, like how long does it take to master a skill? Some things you can master quickly, some things you can't. And if you don't make that clear to someone, and it's one of those things that takes several repetitions to get good at doing, they might feel completely defeated if they're not doing it right the second time that they've done it. And so setting that context to help them understand, kind of how they're progressing, so to speak, relative to what you would expect someone's progression to look like. And then also constantly celebrate like how far they've come. Instead of just saying like, here's a bar, here's where you're at. Why don't we also talk about, this is where you were originally and you've moved all the way up here. You just have this little bit of a gap to close. Like you need to celebrate that progress and get them to focus on the progress and be proud of that, as well as celebrating the things that they added to the team that you didn't have. Some of these career switchers, and I would say like maybe taking a step back in analytics, we're like utility players. We need a lot of different skills. We need great comm skills. We need business sense. We need product sense. And we also need to know how to like do some math and code. And so if you're bringing someone to your team that's maybe weaker on those technical skills, but they've laser sharp, like business clarity and business sense, and they're asking the right questions of data, celebrate that. Let them know. Get other people on the team other than just the manager to say that. The more people that are saying it, the more it's going to make them feel confident in that specific skill set that they're bringing to the team, which is why you hired them in the first place.
Well said. I think it's just like, I love your approach and I love the lessons learned and how you apply them, because we hear all too often, we value diversity, we want diverse talent, but then it stops. And I think there's a few takeaways. One is personalization throughout the process, is really kind of understanding, your team, where you're at, what skills you need. So you're personalizing a job description for each hire, because each hire is going to be different. And then through the interview process, you're customizing and personalizing that with each person you're meeting to see that. The other thing is an awareness. And you've touched on this a lot of times throughout this discussion about being aware of yourself, your team, all of these things that matter the most to you, and aligning yourself to an organization that truly does value diversity and sees the benefit of it, not just in terms of their policy, but how they acknowledge, incentivize, and set their leaders. So extremely valuable chat. I know we've taken a lot of your time, but I wanna ask, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, add me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to chat with people on these topics, or anything that's coming up in your space. And I also love to chat anything nerdy like board games, woodworking, Formula One. Also like to chat about that. So feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat.
Cool. Well, Jess, thank you so much for joining us this week on this conversation. I think it's extremely valuable. I learned a lot. I have pages full of notes, and you've armed me with content clips that I can kind of trickle for months. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat about this and for us to learn from your experience and your approach. So thank you for that. For everybody that tuned in live, I appreciate you joining us this week, and we will be back next week for another episode. So I wish everybody a happy, rainy on the East Coast Thursday, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, y'all.